For 20 seconds the whole town stopped breathing. He stood in the center with a smile that did not reach his eyes, a glass in his hand, and a white horse that pawed at the stones like the ground hurt. "A million for whoever faces my horse," he said, laughing. People stared, then looked away. No one moved. Somewhere a spoon fell and the sound rang like a bell. The plaza had smelled of roasted corn and dust. Lanterns shook a little in the evening wind. He liked that the lights trembled while he did not. "Come on," he called, tipping the glass toward us. "It is only a horse." The white stallion tossed its head and showed the foam at its bit. "Easy," he told it, soft as syrup, then raised his voice again. "A million. Not a promise. Cash." Laughter went up from the rich tables. The poor kept their hands in their pockets, thumbs rubbing coins that did not change. An old man near me whispered, "That horse knew whips." I heard it the way you hear a door close in a quiet house. A woman pressed her baby to her chest. Two boys argued in a hiss. "You try. You try." The man in the center clapped once. "Where are the brave?" His friends echoed him like a wall. "Where are the brave?" A young mule driver stepped out, jaw tight. "I'll stand," he said, but the horse slammed a hoof and the boy's courage slipped off his face like rain. He laughed at himself and backed away. More laughter rolled across the tables. The man with the glass lifted it to the stars. "See? It is not the money. It is the heart." "Heart has rent," someone muttered. The words fell flat. The horse snorted again. Its coat caught the lantern light and threw it back like a sheet. "You raised him hard," I said before I could help it. The man turned. "What did you say?" I kept my mouth shut. I felt the horse watching the crowd the way a tired guard watches a door, ready to be angry again. Then a small voice reached us from the back. "Sir," it said, careful and thin. Heads turned. A boy stood near the bread stall, barefoot, a crust in his hand he had not yet eaten. He lifted his chin. "If I come close, will you keep your word?" The rich tables went quiet. The man's smile returned. "Come closer and find out." The boy stepped down from the curb. The white horse lifted its ears. The boy's steps were slow, steady, almost too quiet for the crowd to notice at first. His bare feet pressed against the cold stones of the plaza, raising little clouds of dust. Every eye followed him now, not the horse, not Don Ricardo, but this child who did not blink. "He'll turn back," someone whispered, though their voice sounded like hope more than certainty. Don Ricardo leaned forward on his chair, the golden wine in his cup trembling with the tilt. "Look at him," he said, his words sharp, meant for everyone. "This is your brave one?" "A boy." His friends laughed again, but the laughter was thinner this time. The white horse pulled hard against the ropes, its nostrils wide, its eyes showing white. The two men holding it looked over their shoulders, unsure whether to keep steady or run. The boy paused a few paces away, lifted his chin, and spoke, not loud but clear enough for those closest to hear. "He is not cruel," he said, nodding at the horse. "He is only angry because he knows no kindness." Murmurs broke out across the plaza. Some shook their heads, some lowered their eyes. Don Ricardo smirked, swirling his wine. "Such wisdom from dirt and rags," he mocked, raising his voice so all could hear. "Tell me, boy, will your empty stomach feed this beast too?" The boy did not answer him. He kept his gaze on the horse, not on the man. That silence made people shift uncomfortably, as if the ground beneath them had changed. A gust of wind rattled the colored banners overhead, and a dog barked far off. Then, without warning, the boy took another step forward. The horse jerked and stamped, the men holding the ropes grunted, but the child didn't flinch. His lips moved again, this time softer, almost like he spoke to the animal itself. "I'm not here to break you. I am here to stand with you." The crowd gasped. Some women pressed their hands together in prayer. A farmer muttered, "He'll be trampled." Yet no one moved to pull him back. Don Ricardo's smirk wavered. He tapped the rim of his glass and said sharply, "Go on then. Prove yourself. Let everyone see what courage buys when it faces death." His words were sharp, but for the first time his voice did not carry the same certainty. The boy took another step. The horse's ears flicked, its breathing slowed just slightly, and a hush fell again over the plaza. The boy stood only a few steps away now. The horse's chest rose and fell, each breath sounding like thunder in the plaza. Its hooves scraped the ground, sparks of stone flickering beneath. The men holding the reins shouted, "Careful, boy. Stay back," but he did not move away. His thin hand lifted slowly, palm open, not to strike, not to grab, just open like an invitation. Don Ricardo leaned forward, his smile strained. "Do it," he said in a low tone that carried strangely across the silence. Touch him. Let us see how long you last. His companions laughed again, though uneasily. The crowd, pressed together at the edges of the square, hardly breathed. Women clutched shawls against their mouths. Men shifted their weight as if ready to step and yet rooted in place. The boy spoke again, this time to the horse. I know you. You are tired of being owned. His voice cracked a little, but it was steady enough. The stallion snorted, ears flicking forward. A ripple passed through the crowd, something different, not fear but surprise. Don Ricardo scoffed. You think words matter? A beast only knows force. He stood now, raising his cup, but wine spilled from the edge. The world bends to strength, not whispers from a barefoot rat. The horse stamped hard at the sound of his voice, and one of the handlers nearly lost grip. The boy's eyes did not leave the animal. He took another small step forward, hands still open. The stallion's breathing slowed again, its head lowering just slightly. The plaza murmured. Someone whispered, "He is calming him?" Don Ricardo slammed his cup down on the table, the sound sharp. Nonsense. His laughter rang false this time. Any second he will be crushed. But the crowd no longer laughed with him. Their eyes stayed fixed on the boy, who now whispered again, I am not afraid of you. Not because I am strong. Because I understand. The horse's ears flicked once more, and instead of rearing, it took a half step forward. The rope handlers shouted in panic, but the boy didn't move. His hand remained lifted, steady, waiting. A wave of silence rolled over the square so deep that even the music in the taverns faded. Don Ricardo's smirk faltered. For the first time, it was not the man but the child who held the plaza in his palm. The white horse lowered its head further, nostrils flaring close to the boy's palm. The air between them felt alive, like it might crack open. A drop of sweat slid down the handler's cheek as he whispered, He's letting him, but his voice broke off, too stunned to finish. The crowd leaned forward as one body, drawn by something they could not name. The boy's hand trembled, not from fear but from the weight of 1,000 eyes watching. He whispered again, so softly most could not hear, You are not my enemy. The horse snorted, shook its mane, then stilled, chest rising in a slow rhythm. It was listening. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Someone cried out, He's taming him, and the murmur spread like fire through dry grass. For the first time, the laughter at Don Ricardo's table faltered. One of his friends muttered, This should not be happening. Don Ricardo forced a chuckle, though his hand gripped the edge of the table. Tricks, he spat. Animals bend for a moment, then break the fool who trusts them. But his voice carried more to himself than the crowd. His words no longer ruled the square. The boy took one more step forward, until the stallion's breath touched his fingers. His hand, thin and dusty, rested at last against the warm, trembling neck of the animal. The moment froze. The horse did not rear. It did not bite. It stilled like a storm pausing before rain. The silence cracked open with a shout. He touched it. The crowd erupted. Women cried, men raised their hats, children jumped, clapping small hands. The poor who had stood hidden in shadow stepped forward, their faces lit with something brighter than fire, hope. Don Ricardo's face darkened. He stood tall, shouting over the roar. Enough. This means nothing. But his voice could not drown the sound of his people. They were no longer silent, no longer bending to his laughter. The boy stroked the horse once, gently, then lowered his hand. His face was calm, almost tired, as if he had carried this moment all his life. He turned slightly toward the crowd but said nothing. He didn't need to. The people already understood. The stallion, white as stone in the firelight, stood quiet beside him, as though it had chosen the boy instead of the master. And in that quiet, Don Ricardo felt something he had never felt before, the crowd's eyes leaving him. The boy kept his hand resting lightly on the horse's neck, as if the animal had always belonged to him. The stallion's sides moved with deep, steady breaths, no longer wild, no longer fighting the ropes. The men holding it looked at each other in disbelief, loosening their grip without realizing. He's not resisting, one whispered. The crowd pressed closer, their fear melting into awe. Children craned their necks to see, women whispered prayers of thanks, and the men who had bowed their heads before now lifted them, eyes shining. For years they had lived under Don Ricardo's shadow, and yet in this moment, a boy with no shoes had done what none of them dared even attempt. Don Ricardo stepped forward, his boots striking the stone. His face was red, his jaw set tight, but his smile returned like a mask forced back into place. A fine show, he said loudly, his voice cracking against the cheers. But a horse bowing for a beggar proves nothing. Touching a neck is not facing it. The boy turned his head slightly, his eyes steady on the man. His voice was low but it carried. You said, 1,000,000 for whoever faces your horse. I faced him. And he faced me. A hush swept across the plaza. The words cut through the noise more than any shout could. For the first time, Don Ricardo blinked, as though the boy's gaze had pressed against something deeper than his pride. The horse shifted again, lowering its head until it brushed against the boy's shoulder. Gasps echoed, followed by applause that shook the night. The people clapped, stamped their feet, cried out the boy's name though few even knew it. Their cheers were not just for the child, but for themselves, for the dignity they had lost and suddenly found again. Don Ricardo raised his hand, but the cheers did not stop. He slammed his empty cup against the table, shards scattering, yet still the sound of the people drowned him out. His power, built on fear and silence, cracked like thin glass. The boy did not smile, did not bow, did not claim the prize. He only stroked the horse once more, then stepped back. His eyes lifted toward the crowd, calm and unwavering. I did not come for your money, he said. I came so he would not be mocked anymore. Every heart in the plaza seemed to beat louder at those words. Don Ricardo, standing in the center of it all, felt the weight of silence return. Only now it was not his silence. It belonged to the boy. Don Ricardo's lips tightened, but his eyes betrayed something new, an unease he could not hide. For years he had been the master of silence, bending the plaza with his arrogance, yet tonight that silence belonged to another. The boy stood without riches, without weapons, yet with the horse beside him, he seemed untouchable. The stallion exhaled, a long deep breath that sounded almost human, and lowered its head again toward the boy. The handlers, wide-eyed, finally let go of the reins. The ropes slipped uselessly to the ground. A murmur swept through the crowd. The horse chose him, someone whispered, and the words spread until they reached every corner of the square. Don Ricardo forced a laugh, brittle and sharp. Chose him? It is just a beast. He stepped closer, snapping his fingers toward the horse. Come. Obey your master. The animal did not move. Its ears flicked, but its body stayed at the boy's side. Ricardo's laughter died, replaced by a flush of rage. The boy looked at him then, steady and calm. You see? Respect cannot be forced. It must be earned. The crowd gasped at his boldness, but no one laughed this time. Instead, a woman called out, "He speaks the truth." Others joined in, timid at first, then louder. Respect must be earned. The chant grew until the plaza echoed with it, stronger than music, stronger than fear. Ricardo raised his hands to quiet them, but his voice cracked as he shouted, "Silence! All of you!" His command, once enough to freeze the air, was drowned by the people's voices rising like a tide. His eyes darted from face to face, realizing the power he thought was his alone was slipping through his fingers. The boy bent slightly, brushing his fingers through the horse's mane. "He is not yours anymore," he said quietly, but the words carried. "And maybe they are not yours either." He gestured faintly toward the people. The crowd erupted. Tears ran down wrinkled cheeks, children clapped, men and women stood straighter than they had in years. The spell of fear had broken. Don Ricardo stood among them, but for the first time he was no longer above them. The horse tossed its head once, proud and free as if sealing the truth. And in that moment, the boy, poor, barefoot, and nameless, became the voice of everyone who had ever been silenced. Don Ricardo's face burned crimson under the torchlight, his fists clenched so tight that the veins swelled along his arms. He opened his mouth to shout, but the words tangled in his throat. The sound of the crowd had changed. It was no longer the nervous laughter he commanded but a steady, rising voice of its own. Every cheer for the boy felt like a stone against his pride. The child stood quietly, his hand still on the white stallion's mane. He did not raise his voice, but his presence was louder than any cry. The horse leaned against him, calm, its wildness folded into stillness. The boy finally spoke, turning his eyes toward Ricardo. "You promised 1,000,000, he said softly. But it was never about money. It was about who truly leads." A ripple went through the crowd. Ricardo barked a laugh, though his face twitched. "A child dares speak of leadership? You. With dust on your feet." His friends at the table tried to echo his laughter, but it came hollow, forced, dying quickly against the voices of the people. From the back, an elder raised his cane and called, "The child has shown more strength tonight than all your gold." Others shouted in agreement. The tide was turning in plain sight. Ricardo slammed his hand on the table, sending a pitcher crashing to the stones. Wine spilled red like blood across the ground. "Enough," he roared. You think one boy makes you free? You think courage feeds your families? His eyes darted across the faces, searching for the old fear, but none lowered their gaze. The people had tasted something they could not unlearn. The boy's reply was calm, sharper than Ricardo's rage. Courage does not feed us, but it keeps us human. Without it, we are only slaves to fear. The words struck deep. The crowd roared, clapping, whistling, crying out. Some wept openly, their voices breaking with relief. Mothers hugged their children tighter, fathers lifted their sons onto shoulders to see. For the first time in memory, the plaza belonged to them, not to him. The horse stamped once as if agreeing, its white coat shining under the firelight. The boy stroked its neck again and the animal stood still. Ricardo's eyes widened, as if he could see his power slipping away in that single, simple gesture. His voice trembled when he finally spoke. This is nothing but chance. Tomorrow you will forget. But even he knew it was a lie. Tonight had broken something he could never repair. Ricardo tried to stand taller, but the plaza no longer bent to his shadow. The people who once dropped their eyes at the sound of his boots, now looked straight at him. The boy, small and barefoot, had given them a mirror, and in that mirror they saw themselves stronger. The horse shifted, brushing its muzzle gently against the boy's shoulder. A hush fell again, not out of fear but reverence. Even the torches seemed to burn steadier, their smoke curling upward like prayers. An old woman whispered, "It is a sign," and others nodded, crossing themselves or holding their hands over their hearts. Ricardo's voice cracked. "Do not be fooled by a trick. The beast is tired, nothing more." But no one echoed him. His words, once heavy, fell like dust on stone. The boy lifted his chin, not boasting, only speaking as if to the whole square. "You all see it. He mocked us with money, but money never touched this horse. Fear did. And fear left when someone dared to stand." The crowd murmured, their whispers swelling into chants. "No more fear, no more fear." It rolled across the plaza like thunder, rising louder than Ricardo's protests. For the first time the man stumbled back a step. His hand reached for his chair, steadying himself. His wealth, his servants, his fine clothes, none shielded him from the truth on the faces before him. He tried to laugh, but it came out thin, shaky. The boy turned toward the crowd. His eyes swept across them, not proud but steady. "You do not need me," he said softly. "You only need to remember that silence feeds him. And tonight you spoke." Tears slid down a farmer's face as he clapped, others joining until the whole plaza thundered with hands striking together. It was not applause for the boy alone, it was applause for themselves, for a freedom they had thought gone. The horse let out a soft snort and lowered its head completely, as if bowing with them. Ricardo sank into his chair, pale, his eyes wide and empty. For years he had built his throne on the silence of others, and in one night, a child had taken it away without lifting anything but his hand. The boy stepped back into the crowd, his place among them unchanged, except now every gaze followed him with quiet respect. The million he was promised had vanished like smoke, but something greater had been won. Ricardo's friends tried to salvage the night, forcing laughter that no longer carried. One of them raised a cup, shouting, "It was all a game," but the words fell flat. Nobody repeated them. The people stood taller now, their backs straight, their eyes fixed on the boy and the horse. The boy stroked the stallion's mane once more, then let his hand fall. The horse stayed calm, free of ropes, no longer needing force to be still. "He listens," the boy said, his voice quiet yet cutting through the murmurs, "because I did not shout at him. I did not beat him. I only stood without fear." A man near the front called out, "And we stood with you." Cheers broke loose again. It was not wild celebration but a steady roar, like the ground itself had found a voice. People who had lived years in whispers now shouted until their throats burned. Ricardo slammed both fists on the table, his ring clanging against the wood. "Enough. You think this changes your lives? Tomorrow you will still need my land, my work, my coin?" He sneered, forcing his voice louder. "This child will not feed you." The crowd answered him, not with fear but with a single shout, "We feed ourselves." The sound struck him harder than any blade. He reeled back, stunned, as though the words had broken something inside him. The boy stepped forward, not toward Ricardo but toward the people. His bare feet left small prints in the dust, each step quiet, yet each one louder than Ricardo's rage. "You are right," he said to them, nodding once. "I cannot feed you. But I can remind you, you are more than his fear." Mothers clutched their children close, fathers raised their hands, elders leaned on canes with trembling pride. For years, they had bowed to power they believed unshakable, and now they saw it falter under the steady gaze of a child. The horse gave a low breath, its ears flicking back at Ricardo's shouting but settling again when the boy touched its neck. "He is only strong because you bend," the boy said softly, looking not at Ricardo but at the people. "When you stop bending, he has nothing." The crowd erupted again, this time louder than before. Ricardo's face drained of color. His cup lay shattered at his feet, the wine long soaked into the dust. And for the first time in his reign he had no answer. The plaza had become something Ricardo never imagined, a place where his voice no longer mattered. He stood there, stiff as stone, while the people, his people he had always called them, no longer turned to him for permission to breathe. Their eyes stayed on the boy and the horse, as though a new center of gravity had formed right there in the dust. The boy lowered his hand from the horse's neck and stepped back a pace. Still the animal followed, ears soft, head lowered, no longer fierce. Gasps ran through the crowd. "It follows him," someone whispered. The words carried, and suddenly others began repeating it. "It follows him, it follows him." Ricardo's jaw tightened. "Enough of this nonsense," he barked, his voice trembling. "The horse is mine. The land is mine. You are mine." He slammed his fist on his chest as though the sound could bring back their fear. But no one bowed, no one lowered their gaze. The old silence had broken, and it could not be called back. The boy turned his face toward Ricardo for the first time without fear, his eyes clear, steady. "You said 1,000,000 for whoever faces him," he reminded. "I faced him. I did not need a whip or gold or friends to laugh with me. I only needed courage. And courage is worth more than your money." The crowd thundered with applause, their voices carrying across the square and into the hills beyond. Men who once worked Ricardo's fields shouted until their throats ached. Women lifted their children high so they could see, and the elders who had waited decades for this night wept openly. Ricardo stumbled backward, the torchlight showing sweat at his temple. His laughter, sharp and cruel only hours ago, was gone. He looked around, seeking his friends, but they had gone quiet too, unwilling to face the storm of voices rising against him. The boy placed both hands gently on the horse's face. The animal stood still, eyes soft, breath steady. In that moment, the boy did not look like a poor child. He looked like someone carrying the weight of all who had been bowed low for too long. He spoke one last time, his words simple but unshakable. "You thought fear ruled this town. But tonight you saw that it was only silence. And silence has ended." The plaza erupted, not with fear but with freedom. Ricardo's shadow, once so wide, seemed to shrink with every cheer. For the first time he was not the ruler of the night. Ricardo staggered as though the noise itself struck him. The chants rose higher, rolling across the plaza, echoing off stone walls that had listened to silence for too long. His cup, his table, his wealth, all seemed small now in the roar of voices that no longer belonged to him. The boy stepped back into the circle of people, the horse still beside him. Women reached for him, touching his shoulders, blessing him with trembling hands. Old men nodded, their eyes wet, while children stared wide-eyed, as if seeing a hero they never knew could exist. Yet the boy did not smile. He only looked tired, as though courage had cost him more than anyone could see. Ricardo shouted again, his voice desperate. "Do you not see? He is just a child. Tomorrow he will still have nothing. And you, without me, you will starve." His words cracked like dry wood. For the first time, not a single voice agreed. A farmer in the crowd raised his calloused hand. "We have been starving with you, Ricardo," he said. "At least now we have hope." The word struck harder than any blow. Ricardo froze, lips parted, unable to answer. The crowd murmured, then clapped, then roared once more, louder than ever. Their strength no longer fed from fear, it grew from each other. The boy finally spoke again, his voice clear but not boastful. "You offered 1,000,000, but your promise was empty. I did not walk to the horse for money. I walked so that he nodded toward the stallion, would not be mocked, and so that you," he gestured to the people, "would see you are stronger than him." The horse gave a deep, quiet breath, almost like agreement. Its mane brushed against the boy's cheek, soft as forgiveness. The chants grew steadier now, no longer wild but united. "No more fear, no more fear." The sound filled the square, spilled into the night, and reached even the hills beyond. Ricardo sank back into his chair, his face pale, his shoulders hunched. For years he had lived fat on silence, but now the silence had turned its back on him. His power, built on fear and gold, lay shattered in the dust. The boy turned, disappearing slowly into the crowd. He had no crown, no coins, no title. But the people looked at him as if he had given them all three. And though he vanished into their ranks, every eye followed, every heart carried the weight of what he had shown them. That dignity, once awakened, could never be chained again. The night deepened, but no one left the plaza. The torches flickered low, smoke drifting into the dark sky, and still the people stood together. It was as if none dared break the spell of what they had seen. The horse, calm and still beside the boy, looked less like a beast to be feared and more like a mirror of the moment. Strength without cruelty, power without chains. Ricardo sat slumped in his chair, his fine coat creased, his face shadowed by defeat. The glass at his feet had shattered long ago, yet the sound of it still rang in his ears. He searched for words to pull the crowd back, to rebuild the wall of fear that had always protected him, but every time he opened his mouth, the voices of the people rose louder. "Courage is ours," someone shouted. "Respect cannot be bought," another cried. Each call struck him like a stone, stripping away the illusion he had lived behind. His friends, once eager to laugh at his side, now stared at their shoes, unwilling to be tied to a man crumbling before the eyes of all. The boy looked out over the sea of faces. His small frame was dwarfed by the crowd, yet somehow he seemed taller than Ricardo had ever appeared. "I have nothing," he said plainly, his words simple but weighty. "No land, no gold. But tonight I had something greater. I had the chance to stand. And standing once means you can stand again." Murmurs swept through the people, warm and certain, like embers catching fire. They nodded, repeating his words. "Stand again, stand again." Ricardo tried to rise, but his knees buckled. The sight drew no pity, only silence. He was no longer feared, no longer followed. He was just a man, stripped of the shadow he had hidden inside for years. The horse shifted closer to the boy, resting its heavy head against his shoulder. Gasps rippled through the crowd, followed by tears. An old woman whispered, "It chose him." The boy stroked the stallion's muzzle and said softly, "He is not mine. He is free." Then he turned to the crowd. "And so are you." Cheers erupted, filling every corner of the plaza, rolling up the hills and into the night sky. For the first time in memory, the people did not cheer for a master, they cheered for themselves. And in that sound, Ricardo knew the truth. The silence he had owned was gone forever. The chanting swelled like a storm, voices lifted in unison, no longer afraid of echoing in the night. Ricardo gripped the arm of his chair, his knuckles white, but his power drained with every shout. His once loyal companions slid their chairs back quietly, their eyes avoiding his. Without laughter, without fear to hold, he was nothing but a man sitting in the ashes of his pride. The boy stepped forward, guiding the white horse with no rope, no whip, only the gentle press of his hand. The stallion followed him willingly, its mane glowing under the torchlight. The sight was too much for some. Tears rolled down hardened faces, farmers clutched their caps to their chests, mothers raised their children high so they could witness the moment. One farmer cried out, "We worked his land, but it never felt ours. Tonight we stand on the same stones as men." The shout ignited others. No more chains. No more silence. Their voices rose into the air, fierce, unstoppable. Ricardo tried one final time, forcing a smile that broke at the edges. This will fade. In the morning you will crawl back to me. You always do." His words rang hollow, bouncing off walls that no longer belonged to him. The people stared back, unmoved. The boy's reply was calm, almost tender, but it cut deeper than any blade. "You are right. Tomorrow we will still be poor. But we will not crawl. You cannot take back what we found tonight." The silence after his words was heavy, almost sacred. Then applause thundered again, shaking the plaza until it seemed the very ground might break open. Ricardo shrank into his seat, pale, as if the voices themselves were lifting the people beyond his reach. The horse tossed its head once as if sealing the truth, before pressing its muzzle into the boy's chest. He stroked it gently, whispering something no one else heard. The crowd didn't need to. They understood. An elder raised his cane, his voice trembling but strong. "We came here with fear in our bones. We leave with dignity in our hearts." The cheers rolled on, carrying the night. The boy, barefoot and dusty, did not smile or boast. He simply stood in the glow of torches, holding no prize, taking no throne, yet leaving with the greatest treasure. The people's courage returned. And though dawn had not yet broken, everyone in the plaza knew, it already felt like a new day. The torches burned lower, but the fire in the people did not fade. Their voices carried on the wind, reaching the hillsides, the riverbanks, and the small houses tucked in the dark. For once, the town was not whispering about Ricardo's wealth or his threats. They were speaking of a barefoot boy and a horse that bowed its head in peace. Ricardo stared at the ground, the echo of their cheers pressing into him heavier than chains. He had built his life on control, on the silence of others, but now silence no longer obeyed him. Every shout of freedom was a blow against the walls he had raised, and those walls crumbled in plain sight. The boy finally turned to leave. He did not wait for applause, nor for promises of riches. He walked slowly through the crowd, and the people stepped aside as though he carried something holy. The horse followed, unbound, its white coat catching the last glow of the flames. Men touched their hats, women reached to brush his sleeve, children whispered, "That's him," as if speaking too loud might break the moment. At the edge of the plaza, the boy paused. He turned once more, his eyes sweeping over faces lit with something brighter than fire, hope. "Remember," he said, his voice quiet but steady, "the million was never real. What is real is what you felt tonight. Keep it, and no man can buy or steal it from you." The words sank deep. People nodded, some weeping openly, others gripping the hands of their neighbors as if sealing a pact. The horse gave a low, gentle sound, and together they stepped into the shadows beyond the square. For a long moment no one moved. Then slowly the crowd began to disperse, but not in silence. They spoke with pride, voices steady, hearts lifted. The plaza that had once been a stage for humiliation had become the birthplace of dignity. Ricardo sat alone, the noise of his defeat still roaring in his ears. His gold, his land, his arrogance, all lay useless against what had risen that night. He had promised $1 million and offered nothing. The boy had nothing and gave them everything. Moral lesson: true wealth is not measured in gold, nor in power over others. It lies in courage, in dignity, and in the strength to stand when silence has held you too long. A single act of bravery can awaken a people, and no riches in the world can silence them again.